Hi everyone, I'm JD from Willowbound Journals, and in this video I'm going to share a bit of an update of what I've done so far in my yearly journal, which I made out of a Cinderella Little Golden Book. This is also a Booktube video where I'm going to share about some of the books I've read this year, and I'm going to tell a story, a bit of a God story that has to do with that beautiful crown. So first of all, here is a little bit of a flip through of what I've done so far in my yearly journal. So basically it's just me writing out the date and a dot point list of what I did each day, or sometimes I use sentences, and I also use it to decorate with any ephemera that I pick up throughout the year. That all goes into this journal. Oh, also my photos, so any photos from the year, they also go into this journal. So it's a bit of a mix of things, sort of like a catch-all, and I like how visual it is, and I like how it's really just a memory keeping journal and a photo album and an ephemera album for the year. And I just tuck some things in there so I know I can stick those in later on. I do add a little bit of journaling in here just to catch up on some of the days that I need to fill in. And sometimes I will just document photos on a page. Sometimes I'll just stick in ephemera. Other times I will just have a whole full page of writing. There's not really any set thing that I'll do in here. It's just whatever I feel like on the day. So that's why it's like a bit of a mix of all different types of things. But one of the things that I documented in this journal was book bingo, and that's what I want to chat to you about today, and how amazing this journey was. It's one of the best things I've ever done in my life. I'd say almost, it's been life-changing or so life-enriching. And basically I am part of a local book club here. I joined it last year, and it was one of my highlights for the year, where we meet up every month and discuss a book. And I absolutely loved meeting people who love books as much as I do and talking about books. And so this year I'm still part of that book club, and they did a new thing for the month of February/March where we did book bingo, and there were 28 books that we had to read in 1 month, and a few different activities as well to do for the bingo squares. And the leader of the book club told us, she had prizes for if you did 2 rows. If you filled in 4 rows, you got more prizes. There was a prize if you got 8 rows. And for anyone who got all rows ticked off, they would be a book queen, and they would get a crown. So when book bingo was first announced, I was thinking, I'm going to aim for 2 rows or maybe 4 rows. And then we'll just take it from there. But as soon as she said, the winner, if someone gets all of the boxes ticked off, they will get to wear a crown. You know me, if you follow my channel for a while, I have a tiara collection. You know that I want to be a princess and I love gowns and wands and wings and fairies and princesses, and I have a collection of tiaras that I love to look at on my dresser every single day and wear every now and then when I have the courage to wear them. And they have deeper meaning for me. They're not just a pretty thing, which they are, but they speak to me about identity as a daughter of our God, daughter of the King, and I am royalty. I am kingdom royalty. And so it speaks to me about my identity and, my backstory of how I kind of thought I was worthless and unlovable. So the tiara is a really, really meaningful symbol for me of who I am in Christ and of my identity, and me claiming that I am a princess. So anyway, when she said crown, I was like, I really hope, or I really wish that I could tick off all the books. But going into the month, I didn't think I would be able to. 28 books in 1 month is a lot of books. That's crazy. So I was just aiming for 2 rows, maybe 4 rows, and seeing what would happen from there. I had so much fun researching books. So the lovely lady who created the book bingo made it so fun, where each box had a different theme. So for example, a non-fiction book, a movie or a TV series adaptation, a book written by an author of colour, a book with a number in the title, a graphic novel, a screenplay, a translated book, a banned book. So, I had to do a bit of research to find the books. And that made it so much fun because, first of all, I got to read very widely, and some of the books were out of my comfort zone. Some of the books I would never have read without this challenge. I got to read a lot of books on my reading list. I got to read a lot of books that I've always wanted to read but never would have found the time to unless I had a challenge like this to do it. So a lot of classics. I'm not really into classics, but I want to read the classics because they've got so much substance and they've got so much to offer. I don't particularly enjoy them as entertainment, but as something to study and learn from, I want to read them. So Book Bingo gave me the best, excuse to read these classics. And I did everything. I did audiobooks, I did Kindle or ebooks, and I did library books. I bought books. I read books that I already own. So it was a whole wide mix. And as a book reader, this Book Bingo challenge was the best thing for a book reader, a book lover, because I'm always reading books. I've read books ever since I was a child, but to do it in such an intense way, 28 books in 1 month, it was sort of like, I don't know, like doing a marathon or doing a play, like being in a musical theatre play where it's so intense for this short amount of time. And you get so much out of it. Like, it's a lot of work, it's a lot of energy. I was so sleep deprived after that month. Every spare second, I'm reading. When I should have been sleeping, I was reading. But, you put in that effort, you put in that work, and it pays off. And basically, I felt like my mind had expanded so much. That's one of my favorite things about reading books, is that you grow through reading books. You learn so much. Your mind expands. You don't have to. It's a way of traveling without leaving your room. You get to go to different parts of the country, or you get to go to different parts of the world, and you get to travel in other people's shoes, and get to learn their lessons. So reading 28 books in such a short amount of time, it felt like this whirlwind trip where I journeyed around the world, and I journeyed around different people's minds, and I journeyed around people's different lives and learned so much in these 28 days. And as a writer, I always say this, so I'm a book reader and a book lover in 3 ways. Like, I love reading books as just a reader to be entertained, but I also love reading books as a writer. I am an author, and I love learning from how they write. I want to learn how have they structured this, how have they portrayed their characters, how have they written this in a way that is engaging. Like, what can I learn as a writer? What skills can I learn? What techniques can I learn? Then the other thing is, I love reading books as just a person who thinks and lives and is in the world, because books can teach us so many things and as people, and they can help us grow in who we are and know ourselves better. Books can help us connect with ourselves better and connect with other people better. Books can expand our empathy, our understanding of others, and give us an insight into other people's worlds. And that's, doing this 28 books in 1 month just exposed me to so many different people's lives and stories and writing styles. And I don't know, it feels like this ginormous crash course in literature. So it was amazing, so enriching. I get like emotional about it, like I always cry thinking about how much this challenge gave me. So I'm so thankful. So after the first 2 weeks, I was reading 5 books per week. And then the third week I was reading 7 books, and then I was just like, okay, well, let's just smash this out. And by the final week, I read 10 books in that final week. and I was like, let's just do it. Let's go for it. Let's go all in. And I made it to all of the books, and it was such an amazing thing because, you know, I didn't know what this crown would be. I didn't know if it would be like a paper crown or like a kid's joke crown or what type of crown it would be. So turned up at book club with my sheet all ticked off, and the lady said she only brought one crown because she thought there would only be one winner, but there are actually two of us. This other lady, she is an amazing book reader. She will often read 1 or 2 books a day, which is absolutely amazing. So she had ticked all the boxes off too, but as soon as the lady said I only bought one crown, unfortunately, the other lady was just like, JD, give it to JD. And I was like, really? That's so sweet, because I really wanted that crown. And, you know, if it came to being like, oh, we both wanted it, then I'd feel bad about taking the crown and be like, okay, you have it. But she made it so clear, like, just, you have it. I was like, oh, wow, okay. Thank you. Because then she pulled out the crown and I was just like, oh, it's so beautiful. It's more beautiful than all my other tiaras. It's my most beautiful tiara that I own now, and I love it. It's so delicate and detailed, which is me to a T, and it looks like a proper princess or duchess crown, and I love it so much. And I just felt like I got emotional even just about the crown, and it felt like God knew what the crown would be. Here I am thinking, oh, it could just be like a joke crown, a plastic, or paper crown. But God knew what kind of crown it would have been, because I know that if I didn't end up going for all 28 books, I would have been, slightly devastated, heartbroken that I didn't get the crown. Once I saw it, I would have been like, oh man, I wish I went for it. I wish I owned that crown. And so, without me knowing what the crown would look like, I ended up ticking off all the books and got this amazing crown at the end of it. But having said that, even if I didn't get the crown, it was so worth doing this challenge. It was absolutely amazing. So let me share. This is going to be a long, chatty video for all my book lovers out there, and for anyone who just is into the deep stuff and self-discovery and self-growth. And this video might loop a few times even, because I don't know how long this video is going to take, but I want to share about all of these books that I read. Here we go. There's 28 of them. I'm going to share them in the order that I read them, and I'll tell you what category they ticked off. The first book that I read was called The Call of the Wild by Jack London, and I ticked off the book where there's an animal companion. So in this book, there's a dog, and the dog is like the main character. It's told through the dog's perspective. It's a very short book, and honestly, when I went into this challenge, I did look up books that were shorter so that I could finish this challenge. And that's why I read a lot of classics too, because a lot of the classics I found short classics. So The Call of the Wild, I already had that in my collection. It was on my reading list. Finally glad I got around to it. I knew there was a bit of like animal cruelty and things in it, so I was putting it off. So I'm glad that this challenge made me read it in the end, because I had to be in the right headspace to be able to read a book like that, where dogs, horrible things happen to dogs. And I can't stand animal cruelty. But it wasn't too bad in the end. Very short story, just read it in one sitting, and glad I read it. And it was, a classic for a reason. It was so readable, very easy to read, almost like a children's book. It read like a children's book, but had, the depth and the substance, and just following this dog's journey. And like, I'm trying not to give it too many spoilers in this video, but you just follow this dog's journey, and it does have a good ending in the end. So that's good. All right, so the next book I read was actually my favorite book of all 28, and it was called If We Were Villains. Oh my gosh, I could do a whole video on this book. I'm going to try to be quick and just skim these books, but let me say this book was so good. I bought it because I thought it would be great, and it is, and I want to reread it. And Dark Academia I was introduced to last year, and that is my favorite genre at the moment. I love Dark Academia because I love the idea of well, I'm quite I like things more on the intellectual side and the studious side. Lecture theatres I call my home. I love studying and learning. So when I read a book with people in that environment, like in a studying university environment, I'm like, oh, this is fun. This is awesome. I get to live vicariously through them. And I love seeing the relationships and the friendships that form in that dark academia setting. And I love the mystery. I love books that have a mystery that keeps me hooked. And this book definitely did that. It has these characters, 7 main characters that you travel with, and you get to really know them and their dynamic with each other, which is super fascinating. What I loved also about this one, it's very based on Shakespeare and his plays, and they often converse in Shakespearean, like the language from the plays. And so I imagine if you like Shakespeare and you know the plays, you'd enjoy this book a lot more because you'd get the references. And it's a lot of interplay between their lives kind of reflecting the plays, and the sort of the characters sort of become the characters that they play in a way, the tropes, and even the book, how it's written and structured kind of follows the structure of like a Shakespearean play type thing. So when I finished it, I was just in awe. I could not stop thinking about it. That's how you know it's a good book. And it was doing more than one thing. It has so many layers, and it was mind-boggling, like all the different things it was doing. Like it was very meta, and so good. The mystery was great. The characters were great. The story was great. I loved it. I really loved it. Such a good book. And that ticked off a book for where the main character is morally grey or a villain. And it's right there in the title, If We Were Villains. So the main character wasn't a villain, but they were definitely morally grey in some ways, for sure. But so good, so good. Ugh. Great book. Okay, the next book I read was called A Book of Fables, and that ticked off a book with less than 200 pages. Funny story, my sister-in-law actually found this book for me at an op shop. She got it for me to use in my junk journals. But I actually think I will keep it because I read all the fables. Again, I just read it in one sitting. It's more like a children's book. And it's just a collection of all these different fables. And I actually got really inspired by a lot of the fables. They were really speaking to me. And I've read some of them out on my channel and on the Creative Soul Journal course website. I've been posting me reading them to the people taking that course and just sharing about how they're speaking to me. So there's some of them, not all of them, there are only about 10 of them out of all of them that spoke to me, but I tabbed them so I can always find them again, and I might read out some more on my channel and just share like how they inspired me and how they spoke to me and encouraged me and taught me and that kind of thing. So funny story about that one. This is what I mean. Like I was reading books that I never thought I would actually read just for this challenge, and it enriched me. It was so good. All right, the next book I read was called Hope by Tim Costello, a book with a one-word title. This is a book in my own collection that I wanted to reread. It's a book I read every few years or so. Tim Costello is or was the CEO of World Vision Australia, and I really resonate with his values and beliefs, with social justice being one of his core values, and how his faith informs his work. And I love his quote where he says he's committed at the core but open at the edges. So committed in, our faith in God, but open into how that is expressed and open to different ways of, cultures expressing faith and learning and growing and being challenged, and not just having like a blind faith, but a really lived in, gritty faith that interacts with different ideas and that can be shaped by different ideas, but still committed at the core. Hope is always a book I like to read every few years because it is a convicting book for me, and I always like to be convicted every now and then when it comes to social justice and how I live my life. I always want to be, kicked a little bit, slapped around the face a little bit, so that I can be more conscious of the suffering in the world, and so that I can do my part, my responsibility to help those who suffer. So it always kicks me a little bit and makes me donate more and think about how grateful I should be for what I have, and helps me to live more mindfully and simply and all that kind of thing. And I think I shared some stories about that too on my channel, and I will share more probably in the Creative Soul course and perhaps on my channel as well. The next book that I read was called Sherlock, the Great Game, which ticked off a graphic novel. Again, a book that I could read in one sitting, because graphic novels tend to be a quick read. And again, I've never read this book usually, but I like the Sherlock books. They're quite fun and easy to read. And this one was based on the TV series, so it had the same characters, the same actors, which was kind of fun. And just a bit of a playful mystery. There wasn't much to it, but it was a bit of fun. And the next book that I read was probably my second favorite book that I read out of all 28. And it was on my list of to be read that I borrowed from the library, called Educated by Tara Westover. So many people who I know have read it recommended it, and it is a memoir, and I love memoirs. I'm a memoirist myself, so I really love reading memoirs to learn and grow as a writer writing memoirs. And it was immersive, and it's one of those books that makes me see myself differently, or helps me to articulate my experience by someone else articulating theirs. And this book even made me cry in one section where she went overseas, and at first she felt so out of her comfort zone, and because it was such a different culture to her home culture, but by the end of her trip it was normal to her, and she loved being where she was, wherever it was. I think it was in France, and she loved the old history and the buildings and being part of it, like the magic of being there and learning and growing. And that made me cry, because I was like, yes, I totally know what she means. Like when you try something different, not necessarily like travel, but if you try something different, whatever it is, it can be really difficult at the start. It can be like a real challenge. You don't know what's happening. It's the unknown. But if you stick with it, you learn so much about yourself and you grow. And it's like, I want that. I want to do that more. Like throw myself into challenges, into the unknown, because that's how you know yourself more and grow and get educated in one way. So I wrote a little note to myself that I want to see myself differently. I want to find out more of who I am and more of what I can do. But one of the ways you can do that is by throwing yourself into a challenge or out of your comfort zone. So yeah, great book. The next book I read was called Girlosophy, and this ticked off a book with a blue cover. This is a book that I own, and it's one of my books that I keep on my shelf for inspiration in terms of books that I want to write. It's more in the magazine style, like a visual book with lots of photography and bold colours, and it's sort of like a manual for life. And I want to write one day like my own manual for living, inspired by that book. So very cool book. The next book I read was Waiting for Godot, which ticked off a screenplay. Again, I pretty much just chose this one because it's the shortest play that I knew, so I could read it in one sitting. And this book I had already read once when I took a literature class at uni. It was one of our texts that we had to read. So I read it quite a long time ago, back in my uni days, and I remember thinking, it was kind of quirky and fun, didn't really get it necessarily, and I don't know, thought it would be good to read again now that I've had a bit more literature experience, now that I've done a master's of writing in literature. It's still a bit odd, but I think that's the whole point. Like, it is a surrealist absurdism play, nihilistic, very philosophical, existential. It's quite bizarre in some places, but still quite fun, thought-provoking. There's a lot of deep themes in there that I completely forgot about the first time I read it. And yeah, it does make you think. At least it did make me think about purpose and meaning and all this kind of stuff. It's not my favorite. It's still not my favorite thing to read, but I can see kind of what it's doing, and I think it's very clever. Don't know how it's doing it, but it's clever. The next book I read was Just Our Luck, which ticked off a book that starts with the first letter of my first name. So this was just a total random book. I really wanted to, when I was researching, the only book I found that I wanted to read was Jonathan Strange and Mr. Norrell, or is it Jonathan Norrell and Mr. Strange? I can't remember, by Susanna Clarke, and I really liked Piranesi by Susanna Clarke, so I thought I'd want to, that's on my list of books to read. But it's so chunky. It's a big book, so I was like, okay, I can't read that one. Let's find something smaller. So I was just at the library, and I found a book in the young adult section that started with a J. And I was like, all right, let's just choose it. Not a book that I would ever choose ever. I wouldn't read it ever again. It was a little bit of a waste of time, that one, but no book is a waste of time. But it was just, young adult. I could read it pretty quickly. It wasn't too bad. I got through it. Like, it wasn't too much of a slog. But to me, it wasn't the most interesting story. But yeah, it was okay. It was okay. All of the books were okay, to be honest. But that was probably the least book, like the one I probably wouldn't read out of all of them the most. I don't know if that is making any sense, but anyway, I just want to move on. The next book is Animal Farm, a banned book. This was banned in China for the let me see if I can get that, anthropomorphization of animals. So this was a book that has been on my list forever to read, and it was actually pretty good to read. I, again, read it in one sitting, I believe, short book, and it was, quick read, easy to get into. The animal perspectives were great, and just seeing how these animals turn from this ideal state that they create to going back to what it used to be. Trying not to give too much away. Just seeing how that all unfolds. Quite interesting, a little bit pessimistic, a bit quite dark, but interesting book. Glad I read it. The next book I read was What You Are Looking For Is in the Library. Actually, this is a book that I keep thinking about, and one that I would maybe even buy. So maybe this is the second favourite book of all of them that I read. There were quite a lot of books that I liked reading, actually, but this is one of them. This one was for a translated book. It was translated from Japanese, and it's made of 5 stories of 5 characters who are going through a work crisis. They're all either like unhappy in their work or not sure what to do for work, and they go to a library and they're recommended a book that changes their whole perspective and their attitude. And that's what I love about these types of books, where not necessarily their circumstances change, but it's their attitude that changes everything. And I'm all about that. It's all about a shift of attitude and a shift of perspective. It's one of the reasons why I like books, because books can change your attitude. Books can change your perspective. Books can change your life. Books can change your behavior, not because anything in your circumstances changed, but because you have been changed by reading the book. And there were so many insights from this book, so many little quotes that I wrote down. One of them was one that I shared in a creative workshop, about how this guy said that he is going to draw near everything that is important to him, and he will make his own anthology. I'm like, yes, that's what we are doing in the workshops, in the Creative Soul Journal course. We are drawing close everything that's important to us and creating our own anthology in our journals. I love that. Another quote was, this guy wanted to create art that people remembered, that people were impacted by. It's like, yes, I want to do that with my life. I want to create art and write words that people will remember because of how it impacted them in a good way. Love that. So that book, so many good things in it. Okay, next book. Frankenstein by Mary Shelley, a classic, a book in letter form. I didn't realise it was told in letter form going into it. And this is a book I wanted to read. A classic, the first sci-fi book, and I, everyone knows the story of Frankenstein pretty much. So I wanted to go to the source. It's in culture so much, in all, like, people refer to it in all other art forms. And finally I went to the source. I'm like, oh, it's quite a bit different to what I was expecting. All those moral questions. It was a hard read for me. This is why I don't like classics a lot of the time. I find classics so ponderous and so meandering, and just get on with the plot. Let's go, hurry up. So this was a little bit of a painful read for me. Still worth it. Like, it's a book, it's a classic for a reason. It has a lot of substance. I just think they could have cut it in half and moved on with the plot a lot more. But yeah, definitely lots of moral questions to come up with, and definitely worth its status as a classic, and glad I read it. The next book I read was David and Goliath by Malcolm Gladwell. This one I ticked off a non-fiction book. This was an audiobook that I had that I needed to read. Like, I'd already bought it years ago. So I'm like, okay, finally, let's go ahead and listen to it, read it. And it's so good. I love Malcolm Gladwell and his podcast, Revisionist History. I love how he tells stories, and I love what each of his chapters and podcast episodes, they're structured in a way that they weave together maybe 3 or 4 stories that all come together to tell one main lesson. Love it. Love it. It's like almost like being in a lecture, but in a fun lecture. So love David and Goliath, all about how underdogs can come on top in unexpected ways. So yes. The next book I read was, this was another one that is maybe one of my favorites. I mean, it's definitely one of my favorites, but might be the top book from this whole book bingo. I Want to Die, But I Want to Eat Tteokbokki. I'm not sure how you say that word, but this one, I actually loved it so much that I bought it. I borrowed it from the library for book bingo, and I bought it. It's the only one that I bought from book bingo. And I own it right now. I'm holding it in my hands right now, flipping through the pages. Can't wait to go through this because I want to actually annotate it. I want to highlight it, and I want to tab it, and I want to write on the pages, because it was like looking in a mirror reading this book. You guys know I've shared on my channel about my mental health journey, how in 2015 and 16 I had depression and anxiety. And even though I don't have clinical depression and anxiety anymore, haven't had it for many years, I still feel like I have a temperament or something that kind of leans toward more of a depressive, anxious type. And like, it's totally manageable. It's not clinical. It doesn't destroy my life or anything like it did in 2015 and 16. But yes, I do tend to walk towards being melancholy and anxious. And so reading this book was so fascinating, because she was talking about how she also has just a super mild depression. It's like not anything drastic a lot of the time, but it's just like this constant undercurrent. Super mild though, like nothing for me to worry about, but just there running in the background. And the other thing, she is a person of extremes. It's like, you just have to read it. I don't want to give too much away, and maybe I do actually want to do a whole video just on this book, because I want to recommend it to anyone who might benefit from it. I think so many people could benefit from this book, and so I plan to do a whole video on this book. But it gave me so many insights into myself. It's like looking into a mirror, where I've learned I am a person of extremes. I never knew it. I knew it in some cases, but I tend to be either everything's going well or it's all terrible. I kind of don't run in between. It's a lot of the time. And speaking about in terms of specific situations, it's like they either love me or they hate me, or I'm either all good or I'm all bad. I run with those extremes. And this book, it's her having conversations with her psychologist or psychiatrist, and the psychiatrist is just telling her, hey, there's a middle ground. It's not that they hate you, and it's not that they love you. It's that they like you, and that's fine. Or it's not that they hate you or whatever. It's that they are angry at you in this moment, but that doesn't mean they hate you. Whereas if someone's angry at me, for example, I will think the world is ending. If I get a negative email from someone saying something negative about me, which thankfully I don't get too much, but when you're out there on your channel, having a YouTube channel in the public eye, occasionally, maybe one time a year, I will get an email from someone just saying something not so nice about me. And I will think the world is ending. I will be like in tears the whole week and thinking, I need to delete my channel. And that's the extreme. Like, you don't need to go to that extreme. But that's something that this book helped me to realize. Like, I'm a person of extremes. If one person just says one negative thing about me, my world is over. I hate myself. If someone hates me, if someone says something negative to me, I think they hate me, and then I hate myself, and then I hate my life, and that's how extreme it gets. And so the psychiatrist saying like, hey, you're still okay. Like, just because they don't like this part about you doesn't mean they hate you. They still want to be your friend. They're still, they're not hating every part of you. They're just not happy with this part of you. It's like, okay, it doesn't have to be so extreme. Anyway, and that was another part of it. Like, I always used to get confused by the fact that what I call my 1,000 faces, and I talk about this in my book, Lamp in Dark Places. Like, why do I have 1,000 faces? Like, there's the polite version of me, there's the serious version of me, there's the ditzy version of me, there's the happy-go-lucky version, there's the brooding version, and I always felt fake. Like, I was like, which one's the real me? I don't know. And what in the book she talks about this as well, that people have multiple dimensions, and that's my version of 1,000 faces. And what they were just saying in the book is that everyone has multiple dimensions. And I used to think that, myself and others just had to have one dimension, and then that's it. That's the real them. And if I couldn't figure out how to interact with all the other dimensions. I'm like, wait, is that the real them? I don't get it. Like, just allowing people to have grumpy moments, for example, allowing people to be angry, allowing people to be sad, allowing people to be joyful, allowing people to have all the emotions and all the faces, instead of thinking, I need to change how I am so that they're always happy, that kind of thing. Let people have their multi-dimensions. Let them be all of those things. Don't feel like you have to make everyone happy all the time, which is impossible to do anyway. So anyway, this book just, takes the pressure off my shoulders type thing. It's like, I don't have to run to extremes all the time, and I can just have all my dimensions, and I can let people have their dimensions, and I don't have to feel responsible for everyone at all times. So that's a way this book has helped me, and yeah, love it. Another book, the next one, The Season by Helen Garner, a book by a local author. So she's an Australian author. I love Helen Garner. I've read quite a few of her books. She's like a non-fiction writer as well. She has fiction too, but I love her non-fiction. And she inspires me so much as a writer. I want to write like her. I even think I want to buy that book in the season, because her writing is a lesson on how to write sparsely, how to write without too much explanation, which is the opposite of what I do. I'm an over-explainer. I'm an over-analyzer, and I want to give caveat after caveat like Kirk from Psychology Seattle. I yammer because I always feel like I need to explain everything. And that's what the contrast of I want to die, but I want to eat Tabocchi, like, she's an over-explainer too. Everything she's talking about, she's like explaining it all. And like, that's me, I explain everything too. And then it's so good to read The Season straight after, because that book is so sparse. No explanation. She just observes things and lets you make the connections yourself, which is powerful writing when you make the connections yourself. And I'm like, when I do my memoirs, maybe I can stop explaining things too much and I can just let it speak for itself. And I want to get her book and study it and practice writing in that sparse way. Anyway, so that book is about her following her grandson's season at footy training and playing football. And I love football as well, so that's also why I like this book. And one day I want to write my own book on football, footy and faith lessons from football, or life lessons from football, because I am actually a footy fanatic. I love my AFL. I'm an Eagles fan. Shout out to Xenia if you're watching, my fellow Eagles fan. I love football, and I go deep with football for all of the life lessons it gives us. So one day I want to write that book. So that was also inspiring to read about her football journey. The next book I read was called The Great Gatsby 4, a book published in 1925. Another classic that I wanted to read, but a bit of a slog for me. So I tried to read The Great Gatsby in the past and I didn't get very far. I found it like Frankenstein. It was just like plodding and, can we get on with the plot, please? So I listened to it through audiobook, which was super helpful. And yeah, I found the second half of the book had plot, and I realized what it was doing. The first half is all set up. You needed the first half to get to know the characters and how they interacted. So by the second half, when there finally was plot and everything came together, you had all of that set up. So I understand, I can appreciate what it was doing. Just that first half, I was so bored. The second half, I'm like, this is interesting. What's happening? Okay, let's go. And how it all kind of wrapped up, it was like, wow, that had a lot of intricacy to it. Because in the end, you realize all the characters had something to do with each other. And so I was glad to read it in the end. Again, it's a classic for a reason. Makes you think about the themes. And glad to read it through audiobook too, though, actually. That was very helpful. So from then on, I started to listen to a lot of audiobooks when I learned how helpful it was. The next book I read was called A Joyful Life. And this ticked off the box, a book with a character who is an immigrant. So this was a memoir as well, and really interesting actually. Another book that I would never have read without this book bingo. Borrowed it from the library, and it was this lady's story. I believe she was from Kenya originally, and just a really hard life there. Violence, abuse, political traumas, poverty. Had a really rough life. She came to Australia, and it's just her navigating how to fit in when she has a different culture, and how people accepted her, didn't accept her. And it was so good to hear her experience and to have greater empathy for immigrants, and just to go, yes, welcome these people who are just looking for a better life, who are so thankful to have this opportunity. She kept saying how thankful she was to be in Australia, and she loves Australia for all the opportunities it gave her. And it's like, yes, people have a right to education and healthcare and safety. People have a right to feeling safe. And I'm so glad that she got that opportunity here in Australia, and hope that everyone can have an opportunity to live in safety and to live with education and healthcare and all that kind of thing. So it was good because I'd never been, exposed to that myself, and to hear her story, I got to kind of live her story and understand it from her eyes. Like, I've never had that, grown up in that type of hardship before. The first half was her in Kenya and the second half was her in Australia. And just that contrast of lifestyles, it really just makes you grateful for what you have, and to know, like, don't hoard it. Help other people who are struggling, help other people who are suffering. I love her perspective. She has a great attitude. Smile at people, talk to people, welcome people, especially if you come to a new country and no one's talking to you, that you can be so lonely. So it really opened my eyes. A Joyful Life. The next book I read, The Time Machine by H.G. Wells, another classic that I listened to through audiobook, and I listened to it in one sitting. So fascinating. I love all sciencey stuff. I studied environmental science, so I consider myself a bit of a scientist. So I quite enjoyed that sciencey part to it, and the whole adventure of, I didn't realize it was going to be such a, I thought it would focus more on the science and time travel itself, but it focused more on culture and society and where is, civilization headed. And it was a little bit dark and a little bit pessimistic, but kind of fascinating, very fascinating, interesting book. Glad I read it. The next book I read was called The Do-Over, and this ticked off a book Time Machine ticked off a book that had a character who was a detective, scientist, or musician. So it was a scientist. The next book I read, The Do-Over, was to tick off the box for a seasonal book. So I chose Valentine's Day for this one, and I had to research. I had no idea what to choose. And it was actually a pretty enjoyable read. I wasn't sure if it would be a slog, but it was quite enjoyable. Just, kind of young adult. I'm not really into those kind of superficial surface level books. I need something with substance. I need something that has a bit more depth, but I wasn't too bored in this one. But still a bit of light fluff. And I quite enjoyed the concept. It's like Groundhog Day, where she had to relive Valentine's Day. She thought it was going to be the perfect Valentine's Day, but everything went wrong. And every time she relives the day, she tries different things to make it the perfect Valentine's Day, or what she thinks is perfect. Finally, she calls it the day of no consequences, and she's just like, stuff it. I'm going to live how I want to live today. And that's finally when things change for her, because she's finally speaking up for herself. She's finally going after what she wants. And unfortunately for her, she wakes up the next day and realizes, oh no, it's the next day. That actually all happened. But now it was all for the best, because now she got to speak up for herself. She got to know this other guy, and, meets this guy, and they end up together by the end of the book. That's not really a spoiler. You kind of know that from the beginning of a Valentine's Day book. So I quite enjoyed the concept of seeing her try to make the perfect day every Valentine's Day, and then realizing that she all along didn't know what was perfect for her. She had to discover that for herself through living it over and over again. The next book that I read was called Alice's Adventures in Wonderland by Lewis Carroll. So this one was another classic, and I listened to it through audiobook. I actually own the book, but I got through a lot of books through audiobook. And it's just a fun ride, right? Alice in Wonderland. I did listen to both, in one after the other. So Alice's Adventures in Wonderland ticked off the book square of a book with a magical creature, and then I listened to Alice Through the Looking Glass, which was a book that was a TV or movie. So that was made into a movie. And both of them, quite fun, adventurous, magical, creative, imaginative. I love the movie. It was one of those movies I grew up with, and I just loved it for the imagination. I love the creative wordplay. I love the comic moments. It's fun. It's fun. Okay. The next book that I read, Fahrenheit 451 by Ray Bradbury, ticks off a book with a number in the title. This is a book that has been on my reading list forever, so I'm so glad I finally read it. Another classic. I really put off the classics because it's a struggle for me to read classics, because I do find them quite plodding, even the good ones. This was a good one, thankfully. This one was quite easy to read in one sitting. And it moved pretty quick. It wasn't like Frankenstein or The Great Gatsby, where it felt really slow. This one moved pretty quick and had a really, likable main character who was a good guy, and very fascinating. I love the substance about it, making you think about how, in that culture, that society, they tried to do everything they could to stop people from having deep thoughts. And, just thinking about what that would mean for a culture, what that would mean for a society, and how I would not do well in that society, because I love deep thinking. Love deep thinking. Glad I read it. Next book I read was called Brave by Rose McGowan, another memoir. And this is ticking off a book set in a country you would like to travel to. So it's set in the US. It begins in Italy. I would also love to go to Italy, so that ticks off both of those. I would love to go to the US, especially to Portland, Oregon, and Seattle to meet psychology in Seattle. These are my tiaras, by the way. This is my actual tiara collection. So, Brave. This was a fascinating read, where I've read a few celebrity memoirs before, and all of them are always sort of gushing about Hollywood and gushing about, I live my creative dreams. I am now an actress, and I have made it as a comedian or whatever it is, as a singer. But this book, totally different. She was saying how Hollywood is a cult that homogenizes like beauty standards, and you only get cast into like one role type thing if you're a woman. And she was cast as a vixen because she had dark hair and a certain body type. And she was just like, it's horrible. It's a horrible cult. She was abused by, directors, movie stars, and her agents, and people would just say like, well, that's the business. That's what you do. That's what you have to do to get in. She's like, no, this is terrible. And it's all a big cover up. They all cover each other. It's common knowledge what goes on, all the abuse, which is like horrible. And so it was very thought-provoking, and it's so true. I could see the truth in it. Like, growing up, we watch movies and we watch TV, and celebrity culture is a real thing, and how it infiltrates our brains, that's extreme language, but it really does. If that's all you know, if that's all you've seen on the screen, then you just naturally think that's the standard of beauty. That's what you're supposed to look like, and that's what Hollywood is. And she was just saying either, don't watch these movies, or if you are going to watch them, just be very thoughtful about it, knowing like, it was really thought-provoking, this book, A Different Look on Hollywood, and being real about it, and how it's like kind of her story of how she got out of one cult into another cult, and then how she left the cult of Hollywood. So I think that's a very needed book, just to have that contrast of perspective and to hold those two together in tension. The next book that I read was called, let's see, I've got to turn the page, The Resilience Project. This one I ticked off from the bottom of my TBR, to be read pile list. So this is a book that I owned, I thrifted it, and I have wanted to read it. Finally, so glad I read it. It was actually really good. It's like, why did I put this off for so long? It's all about how to be happier, I guess. Sort of like a mental health book, well-being book, where he has 3 strategies, which are gratitude, empathy, and mindfulness. And again, one of those types of books which would be good to read every few years, just to kind of convict and to show you like how good you got it, and just to remember these easy tools that can change your perspective. So, and it came a great time, because so many times I can think, I wish I had this, or I wish I had that, or I wish things were different. It's like, I need a reminder, like every single day, things are so good right now. Like, I live in Australia, and I get to live my creative dreams, and I have a beautiful cat, and I have a beautiful creative studio in my bedroom, and I have, a shelf of books, and I have like, I don't know, I've got so much, and I only ever want to focus on what I have and what I don't have. And then empathy is about like being kind to people, that same idea of like always treat people with respect and as whole people, smile at them, be kind. And then mindfulness, that one's all about, being in the present moment, because we can't affect anything in the past or the future. All we've got is now. So do your best right now. And I can get too far ahead in the future, thinking about, what am I going to do here? What am I going to do there? And it's like just a reminder, come back here, come back out of your head, come back to this moment. What can you do right now to make the most of this moment? So really good book, because it's not like other nonfiction books that just tell you things. It's his stories. Each chapter is a story that he shares, which is great. Next book I read was called The War of the Worlds, another audiobook that I listened to, and a classic. And so this one actually ticks off a classic novel. And yeah, it was okay. It was okay. Not the most interesting book, maybe, because I already knew kind of what happened. I knew the story. But still good to know how it was written, how it was structured. And yeah, it was a story. Not much more I can really say about that. The next book I read was called The Love Hypothesis for a Fanfic. So this was one I had to research as well. Apparently this one started as a fanfic of like Kylo Ren and like the Reylo Star Wars story. And the main dude in this book was based on Adam Driver's character of Kylo Ren. And yeah, so it's just a story of, it's going to be pretty predictable, but they pretend to go out and they end up going out. But at first, it took me a while to read it. To be honest, I was struggling at the start to get into it. So I got the ebook on Audible, and I just smashed through 5 hours of it on like 1.5 speed. And I was actually getting into it. By the end of that little 5-hour stint, I was like, all right, I don't need the audiobook anymore. I want to read it myself. And I read the rest of the book myself because I was in it by then. Like, I was with the characters and I wanted to see them together. And I wanted to know how that would unfold. So it was kind of sweet and cute in the end. And the final book I read, amazing story here as well. It arrived on the last day of Book Bingo. So on the Friday, it arrived in the mail. I was like, oh, thank goodness. So everything was put on hold that Friday. I just spent the whole day and the whole night reading that book, my last book. Such great timing. Things like a God thing again. Thank you, God. And it was called The Man Who Mistook His Wife for a Hat. And this ticks off the book of a year, published in the year I was born. And this is a book I'd read previously before. And this book is about a neurologist, I think it's a neurologist, and about the patients that he met. And the great thing is he not only describes the cases, these really quirky cases, but he also weaves it in with his own thoughts on how they make him reflect on life and what it means to be human. And these quirky cases really challenge what it means to be human. Like, so bizarre. Like, one dude, he lost what it meant. He lost the concept of leftness. So he could only see, or I think it was the lady actually, she could only see what was on the right. Actually, there are two cases of this. One lady could only see things on her right-hand side of her body, and she had to turn to the right, to the right, to the right if she wanted to see all around her. She wouldn't turn left because she lost the whole concept of what it meant to have a left, which is bizarre, right? So she could only see things on the right side of her body. Another lady, she lost all feeling of her body. Like, she knew she had a body, she knew she had one, but she couldn't feel it. All cases like this, absolutely fascinating, and it really plays around with what does it mean to be human, and how does the body function, and how the body compensates for it. Like, all these people that he looked at found a way to compensate, and sometimes it was painful to see how they had to compensate, but the human spirit still pushing on to survive, always looking to find a way to survive. So really fascinating book, very philosophical, medical type book. And I read it, I finished it, and I ticked off Book Bingo, and that's all the books that I read. Oh my goodness, it was a whirlwind of a month. It was so intense, but it was so soul enriching. One of the best things I have ever done as a book reader. It was such a fun challenge to do it in such an intense way, and I feel like my mind, like I said, has just grown and exploded and expanded, and I feel like such a bigger person because of it. I feel like I have grown so much through this challenge. So this was a very long video. I'm going to end it here. I really hope you enjoyed it. If you did, please let me know in the comments. If you are a fellow book reader or fellow book lover, let me know if you've read any of these books that I mentioned, or let me know if you want to read them, or let me know any books that you have read that you really love. If you would like to be part of the Willow Book Club, it's an online book club that I run through Facebook. Just a group on Facebook called Willow Book Club. There'll be a link down below in the description box if you want to join that. And basically, it's just a place where we can chat about books and share photos of our books and get book recommendations. I also post books that I will be reading as a monthly challenge, a non-fiction book and a fiction book, but you definitely don't have to read them if you don't want to. It's just random books that I choose that I personally want to read. I have no idea if they're any good. They're all different genres, so they might not be your cup of tea necessarily, but if you want to know what books I'm reading, or some of the books I'm reading, I post those there if you want to read the same ones. So thank you so much for watching, and I will see you all in the next video. Bye, guys. A big, huge special thank you to my beautiful patrons who supported me in the month of February. Thank you so much for believing in me and supporting what I do here on YouTube and with my journaling courses and creative workshops. You mean so much to me. If you would like to become a patron, there is a link down below in the description box, and that's where you get access to all my journal making videos from start to finish, plus behind the scenes updates and announcements. Depending on your tier, you also get access to every single one of my digital kits over on my Patreon, plus mail sent to you, whether it's a printable kit or a happy mail or a journal or a paper pack. Super exciting. If you want to become a member, just click the join button as well, and that lets you become a member of my YouTube channel.